Dear learners, so far we have been discussing about the non-Western perspective on human rights. And in non-Western perspectives of human rights, we found that there is already a debate what is called universalism versus cultural relativism, that whether all rights are universal or some rights are culture specific. Then we discuss about the Hindu perspective of human rights, how Hinduism has contributed to the literature of human rights or the catalog of human rights. That contribution we have already highlighted. Today, we are going to discuss, under this non Western perspective of human rights, the Buddhist perspective of human rights. Like Hinduism, Buddhism also originated in India. It is also among the oldest religious and spiritual traditions in the world. Buddhism is an egalitarian religious tradition that believes in equality, tolerance, ahimsa, and peace. All these values are necessary conditions for the enjoyment of human rights. So we find that the Buddhism emphasizes equality, which is of course one of the cardinal pillars of human rights today, whether social, political, economic equality, that is a very important concern of human rights. After that, we have tolerance, ahimsa, and peace. And it is rightly said that peace and prosperity go together. And violence is the major threat to human rights. So that's why human rights is not possible when society is reeling under violence or even counter violence. That will lead to violation of human rights. So this is the reason that tolerance, ahimsa, and peace, these are considered as important values, and they provide necessary conditions for the implementation and enforcement or enjoyment of human rights. As the previous lectures we pointed out that faith-based perspectives on human rights are duty-centered. We discussed that human rights, the Western perspective is right-centric or right-centered or right-based tradition, whereas in the faith-based tradition like Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, you will find it is duty or the responsibility of the individual or the followers that is emphasized. And this is the reason that we say that the non-Western perspective, especially when we are discussing the faith-based tradition, that is mostly what is called the duty-centered or duty-based tradition. This is reflected in the teachings of Buddhism too. You know that the five precepts of Buddhism, inculcate values of utmost significance for human rights. This is central to Buddhism, and that we should understand that how important or significant they are for human rights. They are, of course, human rights values. They create a positive human rights culture in which human rights are respected and practiced. These five precepts are as under. Number one, do not kill. This is again very important. Do not kill. It means when we say do not kill, and if we try to elaborate this particular precept that do not kill, it means it is not only that harming physically others or individually is bad, but in the broader perspective, if we try to implement this principle, it means that the weaponization of the states, development of arms and weapons for killing others, that is not justified in the light of the teachings of Buddhism. So we can understand that the arms race that is going on today, a lot of resources of the world and the wealth of the resources is being used or misused for destructive purposes by the states. So if we say do not kill in the age of overkill we are living because of the sophistication of weapons. So that is why this is a very important principle or the precept. Then do not steal. Committing theft is a crime everywhere. So that is why what the followers are being asked, not to steal, not to commit theft. It means the recognition of the right to property or belonging of the individuals. It is the recognition of the belongings and the recognition of the right to property or estate, estate, estate of the individuals. Do not commit sexual misconduct. This is another important precept. Do not use harmful speech. Today we find that there are notorious demagogues, hate speeches that are delivered in the society that creates problem. People are instigated to violence. Sometimes you will find this kind of hate speeches and the literature that is produced on the hatred of others, that leads to what is called genocide. It leads to violence. It leads to mass slaughter of people. It leads to mass rapes of women and all, because that is justified through hate speeches and various other kind of narrative that the people try to develop through hate speeches or literature that is produced. Then do not partake in intoxicants. Again, this is important, that the drug addiction that is becoming a problem in the world, and the societies, states, they are helpless how to control this drug addiction. So the precepts, if we see the precepts of Buddhism, the five principles or the five precepts, they are trying to create the foundation, or they are trying to build a foundation for a society which will be ideal, where there is nothing like violence, where there is no threat to the property of others, there is no theft or dacoity. Then the sexual misconduct is not there. It means that the women will feel safe in that particular society. Today, the molestation, rapes, they are the common feature of most of the societies. Then do not use harmful speech. It means that you cannot harm others by the speeches that you are delivering. So that kind of responsibility and the duty is being imposed. And because of this duty, if the people are performing, you see the rights of others can be protected. Then do not partake in intoxicants. That is, drug addiction or, this kind of practices, they are discouraged. And the followers are asked to stay away from this kind of things. Another important thing that we have to understand is Buddhism believes in absolute human equality. According to Buddhism, distinctions among human beings are not real but conventional. Very, very important. You see, Buddhism, as we pointed out, is an egalitarian religion that does not believe in the society of unequals. Rather, it is saying that distinctions among human beings are not real but conventional. They are not created by God. It rejects the hierarchical caste order prevailing since ancient times. We see that hierarchical caste order was there, where the Varna system, under Varna system there was a hierarchy. The Brahmins were on the top, Kshatriya after them, then Vaishyas, and then Shudras. Uh, so the Buddhist tradition, challenging or trying to uh, counter that kind of caste order that was prevailing. So Buddha taught that a person's place in society is not determined by his or her birth, but by his actions and deeds. So this is a very, very important principle, keeping in view uh, the prevailing practice at that time, the hierarchical caste order. So under that kind of circumstances, if Buddha's teaching is for equality, absolute kind of equality, that can be understood as a very important pillar of society at that time that he was trying to establish. Again, in the Buddha teaching, we find that the element of gender equality is available. In the Buddhist teaching, we find anyone, including women, can achieve nirvana or enlightenment. It means women are not considered as misfit for enlightenment, or what we can understand in today's context as intellectual endeavor. They are equally competent, and that's why they are capable of achieving what is called nirvana or enlightenment. Of course, a revolutionary principle keeping in view the practices that were there in the different societies of the world at that time. It also promotes the equality of sexes and equality of all human beings, which is a cardinal principle of human rights instrument today. So we find that all human rights instruments that we have today, they are basically emphasizing the principle of non-discrimination and equality. So it is inherent in the teachings of Buddha. Another important pillar of Buddhism is ahimsa or non-violence. We have already discussed in detail what is ahimsa in the light of the teaching of Hinduism. Like Hinduism, you will find Buddhism also preaches ahimsa, that is non-violence against all living creatures. The beauty is that it is, non-violence is to practice not only against human beings, but it is to be practiced against all living creatures. Then we have the concept of karma. Karma yoga we have already discussed under the Hindu tradition and its significance so far as the human rights is concerned. Here we also find in the Buddhism, it is the relationship between cause and effect. One has to face the consequences of one's deed. You see that the cause and effect relation. So it means a person cannot be spared for bad karma. And that is why if he is doing good karma, of course, he will be rewarded. This is the principle. Again, karma is again emphasizing what is called duty or the responsibility of the individuals or the duties and the responsibilities of the followers. And this is very important that if the person is conscious of his duty, his responsibility in the society, then the society will be an ideal society. Then we find in the teachings of Buddha or in Buddhism the noble eightfold path or the eight Buddhist practices that liberate individuals. The main purpose is liberation through enlightenment. And for this, the guiding principles have been there. These eight guiding principles are: number one, right view or right understanding, perception, approach, or the understanding should be right. That is again important. Right thought. You see that if the thought is pure and right, then of course the action will be also good. Action will be also pure and right. So that is why right thought is being emphasized. We always say that most of the time you will find evils take birth in the brain, in the head. So that is why when your mind is free from all kind of evil things, it means that you are going to do the right things. So that is why right thought is being emphasized. Then right speech. We were already discussing that non-violence is committed not only by physical injury. Violence is committed not only by physical injury, but the violence can be committed by harsh words as well. And that's why right speech is being suggested. Then we have right action. The deeds of the human being must be right. It should not be wrong. It should not harm others. It should not be unjust. All this is being emphasized. Right livelihood. Again, corruption or the rampant corruption in all the societies that are there and the countries, societies, they are reeling under different kind of corruption. It is not only the material corruption. The spiritual corruption can be also there. Moral corruption can be there. So what is happening that your livelihood should be from the right means, not from the wrong means. Again, this is very important. So the honesty and the right livelihood that is being taught, right effort. Again, your effort should also be right, not wrong. Right mindfulness, right concentration. Again, relating with the meditation, which is central to the Buddha's teaching. In the above Eightfold Path of Buddhism, we find the foundational pillars of an ideal society or a state in which we find conscious, dutiful, honest, and sincere individuals. We should remember that all human rights, whether they are mentioned in the constitution of the countries or they are mentioned in the international legally binding treaties or declarations, they are going to be meaningless if individuals are not going to respect and accept them. Ultimately, individuals, the individual, if the is considered as the basic unit of the society, then what is society? It is nothing but aggregate of individuals. What is the state? It is nothing but aggregate of individuals. So when we find that if the society or the states are understood as the aggregate of individuals, it may include family as well. Even the family is also the aggregate of individuals. So in that sense, what happens that if the individuals are good, they are conscious of their duty, they are sincere, they are honest, they are dedicated, they are not selfish, they are selfless, they care for others, they have compassion, love, sympathy, etc. All these important values, then the society is going to be uh, an ideal society. So that is why the element of all the elements of an ideal society are found in this eightfold path of Buddhism. Another important aspect of Buddhism should be understood. For example, influenced by the teachings of Buddhism, you see that the teaching of Buddha that was accepted by many people, many great rulers. We know about Ashoka the Great, who was one of the greatest rulers of India, and how after the war of Kalinga, he renounced war forever, accepted Buddhism, and preached Dhamma. So, influenced by the teachings of Buddhism, ancient king Ashoka the Great expounded the idea of paternal kingship, which is called Ashoka's Dhamma. It consisted of the basic principles of his administration. These principles are as follows. I know these principles we have to see. Ashoka's Dhamma, when we are discussing, some important things are being highlighted over here so far as his Dhamma is concerned. First of all, he considered all his subjects as his children and his duty to look after them. It was not the relationship between ruler and the ruled. It was not based on, the king and the subjects, where subjects did not have any right against the king. Rather, what did he preach? He preached that the king is just like the guardian, king is just like the father. The king has to do the parenting. It means for all the subjects, he has to look after them. It becomes the duty of the king, it becomes the responsibility of the king. Of course, a revolutionary principle giving in view at that time, where in most of the parts of the world you'll find dictatorial, authoritarian, absolutist monarchies were prevailing. Kingship was prevailing at that time. Then, in the Ashoka Dhamma, we find everybody should practice non-violence and be respectful to his or her teachers, serve parents. Again, you see, non-violence is also that the practice of non-violence. And while discussing the practice of non-violence, we were saying that it is by deeds, by actions, by speech, and everything. It is all inclusive concept. Then what is being emphasized by Ashoka the Great, that they should, the people should be respectful, they should revere their teachers, and they should serve their parents. You see, serve their parents, that is becoming their duty. At a time when In our times, for example, when the old age homes are becoming the common features in all the societies where the parents are, or the old age people are living, and that is not considered taboo in many society. Of course, in the societies like India, where the Hindu, Buddhist, and other religious traditions are emphasized, you will find here it becomes a taboo. So that is why you see the responsibility of the sons and daughters to look after their parents, very, very important. So by that way, you'll find the parents in their old age, they will not become burden to the society or to the family. That is very, very important. In this, you'll also find the element or the recognition of the institution of family as the basic unit of the society. Then in Ashoka Dhamma, we find all should avoid animal slaughter and sacrifice. The utility of the animals during those days can be understood, and that is why the ahimsa is to be practiced in such a way that he said that animal will not be slaughtered. At that time, you see the sacrificial rituals were very common in the society, so that is why it was being highlighted. Tolerance toward all religions. You see, at that time, today we say that no country can successfully claim to be mono-religious or monocultural. All countries are multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic. So Ashoka the Great, one of the powerful rulers, is preaching tolerance toward all religions, coexistence of all religions. This is one of the values that if we recognize that many ills in our society, for example, ethnocentrism, Islamophobia, and other kind of phobia, that can be fought. So that is why he said that tolerance toward all religions. Another beautiful teaching in Ashoka Dhamma that we find is conquest through Dhamma and not war. Love, compassion, sympathy you are showing, and through enlightened rationality you are trying to conquer, not through war and violence. So it means brotherhood, fraternity, that is to be developed. To be kind to animals, prisoners, and other fellow beings. In ancient India, you see that he is highlighting this. At that time, what was the concept of the prison? Most of the time, you know, the prisoners were kept in a very bad condition, chained, denied water, food, sunlight, everything. And what he's suggesting? He's suggesting that we have to be kind to animals, prisoners, and other fellow beings. So that is why, whatever today we find in the Geneva Convention about prisoners of war, internally what happens? What is the condition of the jails in our own country? You just see. What is the condition of prisons? You just see. And if we see the Ashoka's teaching at that time, what he is emphasizing, that we have to be kind to prisoners. Emphasis on ahimsa, that is throughout in the teaching of Buddhism and the followers of Buddhism, you will find that ahimsa is emphasized. Why we are, mentioning ahimsa so many times, or non-violence so many times in our lecture? Just to highlight the emphasis that has been accorded to it in the teaching of Buddhism, that we have to understand. When we say violence, violence is not only physical violence. It may be symbolic violence. It may be cultural violence. It may be direct violence. It may be collective violence. Any kind of violence, you see. So all kind of violence is to be understood. It is not only that physical harm, causing physical harm is violence. If our words are making somebody feel inferior, that is also violence. The subordinate and the superior relation is also generating some kind of violence, where the subordinates or the inferior people, they feel that they are inferior to some people. So that is also a kind of violence. The economic inequality also generates symbolic violence, where some people can afford something and others can't. So that is also a kind of violence. So when we take a violence in its broader sense, So we can find that in the society, different dimensions of violence are there. So that is why this is being emphasized. Another interesting thing Ashoka's Dhamma or Ashoka did was abolition of death penalty. Uh, Today, there are many countries of the world who have abolished death penalty, but there are many countries, including our own, they are continuing with the death penalty. About China, where a large number of Buddhist people are living, you find that that country, which is of course not a Buddhist country in the real sense of the term, of course, it is a socialist country. And in that socialist country, you will find in the People's Republic of China, the total death penalty, if you see, 60 to 70% of the total death penalties in the world is given in China. Amnesty International and almost all human rights organizations, they have already started movement against death penalty. European Union has already abolished death penalty. All the countries of the European Union, they have abolished death penalty. But you see, that is being suggested and practiced by Ashoka the Great in ancient times. So that is why Ashoka becomes great, and this is something a very revolutionary kind of principle where vengeance, revenge, and the killing of prisoners that was very common at that time, and he abolished death penalty. He also discouraged superstitions and unnecessary rituals. The societies that are going for the superstitious rituals, it may be many dimensions, many manifestations of that. He did not allow, and rather he discouraged those rituals and the superstitious practices. Then encouragement to building of rest houses, wells, and planting trees. Today, what is being taught all over the world when we are talking about sustainable development, we are seeing the consequences of global warming and climate change and the deforestation. Under this kind of circumstances, you see what is being taught, that we should encourage planting trees. Otherwise, what will happen, that the our planet is heating up, and that will lead to the destruction of all signs of life on this planet. Thus, the contemporary discourse on human rights, emphasizing the abolition of the death penalty, kindness toward animals and other living creatures, and opposition to war, occupation, and conquest, can get inspiration from Ashoka's Dhamma. It may be called Dharma in Sanskrit or Dhamma, according to Ashoka's edict. But you will find that all these, important issues of the contemporary discourse on human rights, for example, abolition of death penalty, or the animal rights lovers today, they are coming up, and they are emphasizing that the rights of animals should be respected. Opposition to war, anti-war protest in the different parts of the world that we see. Occupation and conquest can get inspiration from Ashoka's Dharma, that is important. During those days, conquest was not considered as bad. It was not considered bad. Conquest was a very common feature of all the kingship, and the empires were built up by conquest, but he discouraged it. One of the greatest teachings of Buddhism is simple living and renunciation. It has become more relevant in today's world of consumerism and extravaganza. You see what has happened? It is rightly said, as Mahatma Gandhi said, he was also inspired by the teachings of Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, and other religions, of course. So that our nature can satisfy the need of everybody, but not the greed of all. So, what is to be, there must be a line of demarcation between greeds and the needs. So, in our world, what is happening, that there is a lot of greed, and because of that, people are trying to maximize wealth, maximize profit, and that is leading to consumerism. profit oriented economy, not service oriented economy, we find. So, under this kind of circumstances, when the extravaganza is becoming the common feature of our daily life, Buddhism is emphasizing on renunciation, simple living, which becomes very, very important so far as the spirit of sustainable development is concerned. So the teachings of Buddhism is in complete harmony with the sustainable goals identified by the United Nations. So that is why it is one of the significant contributions that we can understand. It is generally argued that human rights is a post religion phenomenon. But our discussion on the Buddhist teachings and their relevance reveals that Buddhism and other faith based traditions like Hinduism, that we have already discussed, have also contributed to developing a human rights culture by emphasizing the duties and responsibilities of humans. So, the argument that human rights or the contemporary discourse that we are seeing, the narrative on human rights we are seeing, it has been built up under the secular movements. And while tracing the origin of human rights, we were discussing about Magna Carta, and then we discussed about the Glorious Revolution and other, great events. And we found that the people were also opposing the over domination of church and the corrupt practices of the church. The church during the Dark Age in Europe, had become a reactionary institution. So at that time, you'll find rather it was, religion was privatized. And that's why, because of the church state conflict and because of the sectarian conflict. So that is why the religion became a private affair. So secularism was, encouraged. And it is rightly said that, the contemporary discourse on human rights or the catalog of human rights that we have got, it is because of those secular movements or the secular revolutions. But it cannot be denied that the foundation that we have of human rights, that has been built up by these movements, by these religious traditions. It has basically the spirit of submission, care, love, compassion that have been inculcated through these religious teachings. So that is why they are important. However, it does not mean that we are trying to underestimate secular traditions' contributions to human rights. As we have already discussed, that the human rights started taking concrete shape after these revolutions, and then United Nations played a very important role in universalizing the concept of human rights that we have today. So, with this we can conclude the Buddhist teachings and its contribution to human rights. Dear learners, let me emphasize and let me make it clear that the discussion that we have made on Hinduism or its contribution to human rights, or Buddhism and its contribution to human rights, due to paucity of time, we could not discuss many things. But you should feel encouraged to find out in the teachings of these great traditions the elements of human rights, and the way these traditions try to strike a balance between rights and duties. And that is why these traditions are duty based, but at the same time, by emphasizing duties, they are creating a kind of a society where human rights are naturally protected. After Buddhism, Buddhist teaching, and the Hindu teaching or the Hindu contribution to human rights, the or Buddhist contribution to the perspective of human rights, now we are coming to Islamic perspectives on human rights. Before we move forward, let me make it clear that Buddhism and Hinduism, they originated in India, as India has been a country of great religions, where great religions of the world, oldest religions of the world, like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, they all took birth in India. Similarly, you'll find the Middle East, that is from Palestine to the present day Saudi Arabia. If we see, this particular area is also the birthplace of great religions of the world. So, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, these three religions who are together called Abrahamic traditions, they took birth in this particular region that is called Arabia. About Islam, we should remember that Islam is one of the religions under Abrahamic traditions. Originating in Arabia, it has the second largest followers in the world, and it is also one of the fastest growing religions. When we are trying to understand Islamic perspectives on human rights, we will try to understand Islamic perspectives on human rights in the light of authentic sources like the Quran, the Sunnah, that is the prophetic traditions, and other religious and philosophical sources. What is, when what was the position of the society at that time when Islam originated? In Arabia, for example, female infanticide was something that was the common feature of the society. Wars, enmities, they were celebrated. Revenge was the common feature. So, society, at that time, if you see, it was just like Hobbesian state of nature, where a perpetual war or sense of insecurity used to prevail. At that time, you'll find Islam originated. And the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, he preached the gospel of truth, and then sympathy, love, compassion, brotherhood. In the light of the teachings of Quran and hadith or the prophetic traditions, we find that the Islamic concept of human rights, or Islamic perspective of human rights, can be understood by dealing with some very important principle. First of all, we should remember that according to Islamic teachings, humans are the noblest of all creations. That is called Ashraful Makhluqat. They are the noblest of all creation. They have been endowed with reason and free will. When human beings have been endowed with reason and free will, they are accountable for their deeds here and hereafter. This is the cardinal principle of Islam, that human beings are Ashraful Makhluqat. That if that is something that is a badge to celebrate, at the same time it imposes many responsibilities, because they have been endowed with reason. They can differentiate between what is good and what is bad, what is wrong and what is right, for which reason has been endowed to them. And that they have been also given what is called free will. So if the free will and the reason that is there, then they have to do all the right things. Otherwise, they will face the consequences here and hereafter. After this, we will go to understand human rights in the light of Islamic teachings. One of the most important principles of understanding Islamic approach to human rights is the Islamic principle that is underlining that there are two kinds of rights and duties. Number one is Huququllah, That is, the duties or the rights, the duties of the believers toward Allah, or the rights of Allah. The duties that the people, they may be the rituals, the prayers, and all. And then the second is huquq al-ibad, that is rights of every soul on another, or duties towards humanity at large. So in the rights of every soul on another, or duties toward humanity, that is huquq al-ibad, we find the principles of human rights inherent. This is huquq al-ibad has a long list. There are many rights, or there are many duties that we have towards our fellow human beings. For example, one of the huquq al-ibad, or the duties, is that according to the prophetic tradition, Prophet of Islam says that if you eat and your neighbor starves, you are not a true believer. So you have to be, first of all, you have to be sure that your neighbor is not starving. Your responsibility is that you have to see that he is not starving. If we try to apply it collectively, then the aggregate of individuals is nation state. So if a nation is prosperous, wealthy, full of resources, and if the neighboring countries are facing starvation, drought, and if that nation is not doing anything, then according to the teachings of Islam, that is just like a crime. So in the light of the teachings of Islam, you see huququl abad becomes very, very important. More emphasis has been given to the huququl ibad than the huququllah. And according to the teachings of Islam, God will not forgive for violating huququl ibad. For that, a person is bound to be punished here and hereafter. So that is a very, very important principle. It is, huququl ibad may include right towards your neighbor, right towards your parents, the duties towards your neighbor, duties towards your parents, duties toward your teachers, duties towards your society. Every kind of, you see, in the gamut of the huquq al-ibad, you will find many things can be included. So, dear learners, we will continue our lecture on the Islamic perspective of human rights. Today we are winding up, but we will continue in the next lecture, and then we will try to wind up this non-Western perspective of human rights. Thank you very much.